Chapter 25 Grand High Dragon Master. If you think that 4 dragons and 4 people in a 2-man tent would be a bit of a squash, you'd be right. It was a nightmare, in fact. The dragons had been quite dozy at first, so carrying them back up the moonlit garden was a piece of cake. But it wasn't long before they started to wriggle and wanted to stretch their wings. Luckily, I knew how to calm them down. Or I thought I did. I told the others to come prepared with a shoebox and some broccoli, and because of my status as a chief dragon expert, they'd all actually followed orders. I felt as if I could get used to this, my new role as respected elder, the voice of experience and wisdom, leading my minions. Perhaps they should call me something like Commander or Captain, perhaps even Grand High Dragon Master. Yeah, that sounded good. I'd probably need a cloak, or a special hat maybe, and a logo. Definitely a logo. Oi, Earth to Planet Thomas, said Ted, poking me in the side. Shaken out of my daydream, I saw Ted pulling his daftest face at me. Come on, Pongtastic, what do you think? He said. I waved goodbye to the vision of myself as Grand High Dragon Master. Who was I kidding? There was no way Ted was going to call me Grand High anything, except Pong Master maybe. He was holding out his shoebox to me, and, I have to admit, the little imp called Envy started muttering away in my head when I saw it. He'd painted it in this really cool design, with bright shoots of orange flame up the sides, and it was lined with a black silky cloth. Turning round, I saw Kat and Kai cradling theirs. It looked as if everyone had gone to town on the decorating. Kat had a soft velvet scarf for her dragon to curl up in, and the box itself was painted and covered in shiny, sticky black gems. A line of rubies and diamonds spelled out the words Top Secret. As if that wasn't guaranteed to make someone go in for a nose around, I don't know what would. Kai, who tended to have a lot less patience for arty, crafty stuff, had just painted his a dark green, but even he had decked it out with some kind of fleecy material. They all looked way more inviting than Flicker's shoebox. Right. Cool, I said, feeling pretty pleased that I'd managed to ignore my little envious imp, who had been all ready to stomp off in a huff at having been outdone. I was glad because everyone seemed really chuffed that I thought they were up to scratch. And then they started quizzing me on what we should do next. I guess I was still Grand High Dragon Master after all, even without a hat. Food and sleep, I told them. That's what's next. Get your box and your broccoli ready. Flicker flew down and tried to pick the broccoli stalk I was holding out of my fingers. Let's see if we can entice them in. If they're anything like Flicker, they must be hungry by now. The dragons were hungry, but it was soon clear that Flicker was on his own when it came to loving all things green and sprouty. Ted's dragon appeared to have a taste for, well, anything and everything. He'd already found and demolished a chocolate fudge bar that must have fallen out of Ted's pocket, plus most of its shiny wrapper, an apple, and some crisps, which Ted assured us he had been saving to share with us later. The dragon was now surrounded by what appeared to be the remains of several small insects and a hairy, half-chewed marshmallow, and was biting off and swallowing the buttons on Kat's cardigan. With every bite he took, his belly pulsed with a fiery orange glow that rippled down through his tail as though flames were sizzling through him. Cheeky thing, Ted said. He's just munched all our provisions. You're just mad because he got to them before you could, I said with a laugh. Kat leaned across, trying to reach her dragon, who had settled by the edge of her sleeping bag. Hey, look at this, she said. We peered down to where she was now pointing on the ground sheet of the tent. All around the little purple dragon were patches of ice, the delicate crystals forming into amazing patterns, almost like the creature had been painting a picture in frost. The dragon stretched up, drew back her wings, and let out another freezing breath, swinging her head from side to side to build up the icy markings. She's an artist like me, said Kat, with obvious delight. Kai snorted, but before they could launch into a full-on argument, I noticed something. Look what your one's gone and done, Ted. We all looked into the furthest corner, where there was a mound of what looked like cotton wool, but which we soon realised was the downy side of Ted's sleeping bag. It had been ripped open. The golden dragon was now happily shredding Grandad's tent, its needle-sharp claws and teeth tearing into the material, and he had already made a fair-sized hole. How are we going to explain that one? Said Ted. Never mind about that, said Kai. Where's my dragon? Chapter 26. Poor Guppy. We all stared at the hole in the tent, the dragon-sized hole. Making sure Flicker and the other dragons were safely in their shoeboxes, we crawled out of the tent and started hunting. But it was properly dark now. It's no good, said Cat, after several minutes. We'll have to wait till it's light. He'll have flown off by then, said Kai, in a full-on sulk. Typical. Cat gets the artist, and I get the escape artist. We piled back in the tent, Kai still muttering unhappily. As we all squashed back inside, Ted suddenly howled. Ow! Stop it! Stop what? We haven't touched you, I said. Someone just pulled my hair. You must have caught it on something, said Cat. Ow! Stop it! That hurts. Ted rubbed his head crossly and glared at each of us in turn. Well, you can't blame us, I piped up. You can see we're right here. Ted looked about him, confused. Keep very still, said Kai, suddenly. Ted froze in horror, obviously wondering what nasty nighttime creature Kai was about to save him from. He wasn't the bravest when it came to bugs and beasties, which may have stemmed from the time Liam dropped tadpoles in his milk. We all sat there watching as Kai leaned forward and reached up above Ted's head to where the lantern was hanging. Got you, he said with a laugh. And there, in his hand, was his dragon. Only he wasn't greeny blue with peacock markings anymore. He was the exact shade of red of the lantern. Cool, said Kai, cradling the dragon with an expression of undisguised admiration. Mine can go undercover, the ultimate in camouflage. We learned an important lesson right there. All dragons are not the same. Not by a long shot. I wasn't sure how any of us were going to sleep, but eventually the dragons curled up in their shoeboxes. As the others settled down, I watched Flicker, his scales rippling through a kaleidoscope of colours. And then I must have dropped off as well, because the next thing I knew it was light and someone was yelling. Is that your granddad? Cat asked me, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. He sounds really mad. I'd never heard Grandad raise his voice, let alone shriek like that. I shook my head. I don't think so. Keep hold of the dragons, I hissed. I'm taking a look. I unzipped the tent and peered out. Grandad was standing on the front step, Lolly tucked behind his legs in the open doorway, and planted in front of him was the fuming inferno that was Grim. Whole place trashed, that blooming kid. I told you he was trouble, he bellowed. Honestly, that horrible man. How could he shout at Grandad like that? I pictured the swarm of dragons we had seen last night, and how they shredded, uprooted and devoured whatever they could find before taking off and flying good knows where. Grim must have woken up and found the devastation, and of course came straight here to blame me for everything. Without stopping to think, I stormed out of the tent towards him. Hey, it wasn't us, I shouted. Lolly wriggled past Grandad and toddled towards me. She wrapped her arms around my legs and clung on tight. With me off camping, Mum and Dad had brought her for a sleepover too, taking the chance for a night out. But the rumpled frown in her face told me this angry, shouting man wasn't fitting in with her plans for the morning at all. Guppy sad, she whispered, pointing her finger at Grandad. Poor Guppy. Now then, let's just calm ourselves down, came Grandad's voice. It's probably foxes or badgers. Why not come in for a cuppa, and we'll see if we can get to the bottom of this, shall we? How he kept so cool in the face of all that yelling, I don't know. He deserved the medal, my Grandad. Grim was not so cool. He turned and pointed a finger at me as if he imagined lightning could fire from the tip of it. And I almost thought it would. Fox is my foot. I've already caught him in my garden once. He'll have been up there again, you can bet on that. What's this, Thomas? Grandad asked. Didn't tell you about that, did he? Said Grim. I told you he was trouble. Grandad looked over at me. I wasn't doing anything, I spluttered. I thought I saw something attacking his vegetables, that's all. Grandad obviously didn't know quite what to make of this new information. Well, like he says, I'm sure he wasn't up to anything, said Grandad, still keeping his voice nice and quiet. And as for right now, Thomas has been camping in our garden with a few of his friends. They've been tucked up in their tent the whole time. Haven't you, Chipstick? Although I knew it wasn't us that had caused all the mess, I couldn't bear to look at Grandad in the eye. Not after we had sneaked out. Grim turned his laser vision on my mud-splattered boots and trousers and then fired his lightning finger at them. Proof. A look of triumph hit his face. Grandad's eyes dropped and also took in the muddy evidence. and suddenly I saw his shoulders sag, like he was one of those giant bobbing inflatable Santas at Christmas, and someone had come up and let the air out of him, just enough so his head flopped and wobbled a bit. And to be honest, that felt even worse than if he'd yelled at me, because you know that twinkle I told you about, the one that Grandad's face makes light up? Well, it had gone. Honestly, Grandad, it wasn't us, I pleaded. Grim glared at me and set off across the grass towards the tent. Are the rest of them in there? He growled. The noise had woken the dragons, and I could hear Ted, Cat and Kai wrestling to keep them in. Before Grim could pull open the flap, one side of the tent began to bulge, and then another, and then something shot out of the hole Ted's dragon had chewed, followed by two more flitting shapes. Thankfully Grim was bending down, preparing to thrust his head in through the entrance, and Grandad had turned to scoop Lolly up, so no one, apart from me, noticed them. They did, however, notice what happened next. You couldn't really miss that.